thanks for having me back, everyone. I really appreciate this opportunity. Now, when it comes to perfectionism, I was strongly sensitized to this issue, made aware of it very graphically when I first moved to Utah. Well, moved back to Utah some years ago. I'd been a professor at Indiana, and we came back to Utah because my beloved mother-in-law was diagnosed with dementia and would need help. And so I opened up a clinical practice here. And in my first week, a young lady, we'll call her Vivi, made an appointment with me. And so I do have her permission to talk about this. And I was sitting down, and she walked into my office. She wouldn't make eye contact with me, and she was wearing long sleeves. So she had long hair, relatively unkempt. She was wearing big baggy clothes. She almost like ghosted into my office and sat down without trying to call attention to herself at all. As she began to talk to me, she was talking with her hands a little bit. Fancy word for that, by the way, is gesticulation, right? She was gesticulating a little bit, talking with her hands. And I noticed as she would go like this, her sleeves would creep up a little bit on her forearms, and I could see bloody bandages. And so about 20 minutes into the conversation, I said, okay, I'm going to pry because it's my job as a counselor to do this. Would you be so kind as to pull your sleeves up? And she blushed strawberry pink. And so she had just gotten to the point she'd make eye contact with me. And at that point, she looked away, blushed, and she pulled up her sleeves, and she had sutures and heavy bandages on each forearm. And I said, help me understand this story. Like, please tell me the story. And she started to sob, and she said, I was always told, be therefore perfect, and I've never been perfect. So the story that unfolded is she had made an attempt on her life a little bit over a week ago from the time I met her, and her 9-year-old daughter found her bleeding in the bathtub. This little girl had the presence of mind to call 911 and to start to apply first aid. Vivi told me the story that she'd lived her entire life trying to obey all of the rules that she was given, and she couldn't do it all the time. And so therefore she started to lose hope. She couldn't live the rules of our society gives moms, or employees, or members of a particular church, or anything like that. She couldn't obey all of the rules all of the time. And so with that constant failure grinding away at her, she eventually gave up in despair. Now, one of the things I'm very grateful for is perfectionism rarely goes to this extreme. Once I was sensitized to the issue and we started to do some research on it, what we found, though, is that it is very common and that there are some solutions to perfectionism. And hence, this presentation is one of those solutions. So I'd like to shout out to my friends, Eileen, Jake, and Mitch. They were kind enough to provide some of the lit review on this. We did a more academic version of this presentation at a psychology conference last year, and they gave me some suggestions on how to make it more applied and more lived for this presentation today. So I'd like to thank those three publicly. Our goal today is we're going to talk about the research, the background, the data on perfectionism. We're going to talk about the history of it in terms of where it comes from historically in our society and why it's so pervasive. And then we're going to talk about interpersonal processes that facilitate and perpetuate perfectionism in relationships and families and schools. We're going to introduce the idea of imperfectionism as another way of thinking about this particular process and issue in a way that's more helpful. And then we'll provide some techniques. Now, these are techniques you can use with your clients if you have individuals that you're working with that suffer from perfectionism. To be frank, I find this also helps us as providers keep these ideas in mind and to do it for ourselves as well. So, perfectionism is multifaceted. One of the things we need to acknowledge up front is that there are two broad varieties of perfectionism generally, and then we'll get into more specifics with the less healthy form of perfectionism. Broadly, there is such thing as positive perfectionism. Positive perfectionism is where there is an ideal, a standard that you have in mind that you aspire to. It is an aspirational goal. Hey, I'm going to try this and I'm going to do my best. And regardless of whether you succeed or fail at it, it remains something worthy of your hope. Okay? Maladaptive perfectionism takes away the idea of aspiration and replaces it with the idea of shame. Okay? Adaptive. Hey, I had a goal to cut down my running time from a 10-minute mile to a 9-minute mile. Okay, so I tried it. I was at 10 minutes, 11 seconds. I'm going to keep trying, right? Aspire. I'm going to keep working at this no matter how long it takes. I can do it eventually. Maladaptive perfectionism is, why do I even bother? I'm even slower today than I was the other day. What's the point of all this? I'm just going to stop working out. If I don't go to the gym and if I'm not jacked immediately, screw that, okay? So you notice that shame poisons it. And that's what takes the adaptive idea, hey, I'm going to try this and I'm going to do my best to shutting down, self-blame, self-recrimination, self-hatred. That's what poisons aspiration. So there are three broad types of maladaptive perfectionism. The first one we've already touched on is actually called self-oriented perfectionism. This is where you hold very high standards for yourself and you shame and judge yourself on your inability to live up to those standards. Oftentimes, the less realistic the standard, the more unrealistic the standard is, the more and more pathology builds up, okay? And it's the shame factor that causes the suffering, the pathology to build up more and more over time. It's that shame factor. So one of the things we find, for example, in working with some certain compulsive issues, like one of the things that was very surprising to me, moving back to Utah, I'd lived in Texas for many years, in Indiana for many years, and then I came back to Utah, is did you know that Utah is pretty much the only state where pornography addiction exists? There's one other, and that's Mississippi, okay? Well, guess the two states that consume the most pornography in the country, Utah and Mississippi. They're also the two most conservative states in the country and the two most anti-porn states in the country. How the hell are we going to figure this out? They're anti-porn, porn is bad, why are they using so much damn porn? You're right, shame. Right? For example, I'll never forget, I was at a dinner party in Indiana, and the gentleman hosting the dinner party goes, hey, after this we're going to go into my cinema and we're going to watch, and he started labeling these really high-end, award-winning pornographic videos. Now, having graduated from Pleasant Grove High School, having been raised in Utah, that was a real record scratch moment for me. That here we are, a bunch of sophisticated professionals, and for him this was something as on the order of controversy as cheese tasting, chocolate tasting, or wine tasting. We were going to go into his home cinema and taste porn, right? Kind of blew my mind. It was a whole new way of looking at it. No one in Indiana is going to come to my friend and say, you are a porn addict and you should be ashamed of yourself. He doesn't compulsively use it. He uses it maybe twice a week. And it's a high-end thing that he does. It's from him that I learned, did you guys know that pornography actually has their version of the Oscars? Yeah, some of you knew that. I didn't know that until then. And so there are these ways that people can relate to things non-compulsively. Alcohol, for example, can be related to non-compulsively. People can socially drink. Cannabis can be related to non-compulsively. People can I don't know how kids call it today, but back in my day, smoke a bowl on occasion. People can have a healthy relationship with pornography. But the second we add shame to it, it ratchets it up, the likelihood of a compulsive relationship to any of these. Okay? So when we have self-oriented perfectionism, then that increases the likelihood of compulsive, anxious, and depressive kind of issues markedly. I have this extremely high standard to myself, and if I do not meet the standard, I suck and I'm a failure. Okay? So one of the things that happens is what we call the self-soothing cycle, where I feel really ashamed of myself because I'm failing all of these internalized goals that I have for myself. And because I shame myself with it, I feel so bad that I seek out for the nearest source of dopamine. Like if I'm an alcoholic, alcohol. If I'm a cocaine addict, cocaine. If I compulsively use pornography, porn, right? And then I feel even worse about myself, and so then I turn to my substance to help me feel better. You guys get this dynamic? And so that for some people have compulsive this is not true for all people who have compulsive relationships to processes or substances, but it is very true for many. And so therefore this cycle perpetuates. Like a related version of this is what's called other-oriented perfectionism. This is where you hold extremely high standards for other people, and if they do not live up to your standards, you shame them accordingly. For example, this morning, Adam was kind enough to send me a text and say, there's a big wreck on northbound I-15, it's going to take you longer to get here than average. Usually takes me 30 minutes to get here. It took me 55 minutes to get here this morning. Thank you, Adam. Okay, I appreciate you doing me a solid. But as I was driving, I was relieved that my colleagues would understand if there was a big wreck and I was stuck in traffic, right? So my blood pressure didn't even fluctuate. But imagine you have a boss with other-oriented perfectionism. You show up 20 minutes late. You left at your usual responsible time, but you get to work 20 minutes late. And they're hitting you, you must not have been here 20 minutes ago. Well, there was this big wreck. You should have thought of that. But I leave an hour, it doesn't matter. Where were you? How does that relationship with that boss feel? Good? You feel supported? No, it feels poopy, okay? And so therefore, you're less likely to trust that supervisor. You're less likely to feel safe at work. That shame just poisoned that relationship. They're shaming you, right? This happens, for example, more often when an individual in power extends their ego into somebody with less power, meaning that their identity is extended into the identity of someone else. For an employer, what they're worried about is you running late is going to make them look bad. They have an inability to distinguish your being a separate being from them, and therefore they get upset when you're running late as though they were running late themselves. You guys get this dynamic? And therefore they have to be as upset with you as they would be with themselves. Now, we see this with parents and children very commonly. I can remember one night, I was 15 at the time, and a dear friend of mine was attempting suicide, and I knew something was really going on with her, so I walked the 3 miles to her house, get in there, find out, I won't describe in detail what was going on, get her parents involved, there's a big brouhaha, we get her to the hospital, I'm walking home because no one thought to give me a ride because they're in crisis with their daughter. I walk all the way home. I'm walking into the house at 2 a.m., the long country, lonely country road that my parents live on, and I remember a car drove by at 2 a.m. and I thought, that's weird. And so I go and I go to bed. And the next morning, I wake up to hellfire. I'm called a son of perdition. Don't you know how you're making this family look? Because of you, we look bad. Because somebody called my parents and said, hey, your son's walking in the house at 2 a.m. You know, you shouldn't be doing that. And my parents, rather than coming and asking me, what was going on? You're sneaking in the house. Instead, evil, damnation, you're bad, right? So how much did I trust my parents with, oh, by the way, a friend of mine attempted suicide last night? I didn't even tell them until years later. So other-oriented perfectionism, you take that shame and you apply it on somebody else, confusing your identity from theirs. You know we've got a toxic dynamic if your parents say, you're making this family look bad, right? The healthy response is, hey, what's going on? We'll talk about curiosity and its role in dispelling perfectionism later. Now, because of some of my early very dramatic experiences opening a practice here in Utah since living in Indiana, I had assumed that rates of the first two types of perfectionism, self-oriented and other-oriented, were sky high here. And so I did what we academic types do, did a bunch of research and found out, no. Along the Wasatch Front, so from Layton, actually all the way up to Ogden, all the way down to Nephi was our sample population. And the rates of first and second type of toxic perfectionism were the same as nationwide. Where things got fun was with the third type. The third type of perfectionism is projective perfectionism. This is where you think you're being judged by everybody around you when you're not, but you're stressed out as though you were. Okay? I think I told you guys the story the other day. A buddy of mine, he's building a wooden race car, like restoring a 1914 wooden race car in his garage. And when I do my, old man, doctor says I need more exercise rounds around my neighborhood, and I stop by and chat with him, he goes, Draper means so much. All these judgy Mormons, man, all these effing Mormons, all they do is judge me all the time. And so we don't let our kids play with their kids. They're just, And so I'm standing in his garage, and I know all my neighbors, because I'm that weird guy that gets to know people, and I'm like, just looking, I'm going, not a Mormon, not a Mormon. Went to church once 10 years ago, not a Mormon, not active, not a Mormon, not a Mormon. He was just assuming he was being judged all the time, and it was stressing him out really bad. So I just rocked somebody's world. A colleague of mine is an anthropologist of Latter-day Saint culture. Okay? So anthropologists study culture. And one of the things he says, only 9% of residents of Salt Lake County go to church, an LDS church, once a year or more. 9%. But when I'm traveling abroad and I say, I flew out of Salt Lake City Airport, I live in Utah, they're like, wow, do your neighbors have a lot of wives? It's just Mormons everywhere from what I hear. And people then ask my colleagues, said, well, why is there so many LDS church houses? Well, the answer is if 9% of your population of 2 million all go to church on Sunday, you're going to need a lot of church houses, right? Even then, it's only 9%. But many people, when we test the citizens of Salt Lake and Utah County, in Utah County it's down to like 28%, that many people feel judged all the time, when there's actually, they're just judging each other. Or most of the time, nobody's judging anybody at all. They're just assuming that they're being judged. So that particular type of perfectionism, that projective perfectionism, the rates nationwide are about 3%. It's the rarest form of perfectionism. But here in Utah, it's 15%. It's 5 times higher. That means in a room this size, 2 to 3 of you have probably suffered chronic feelings of this projective perfectionism. I don't ever been around here so judgy, right? It's stressful to live like you're constantly being scrutinized. And so if we had time, we would get into like the Jungian archetype of the all-seeing one, like the all-seeing eye, the panopticon. There are various Christianities that believe that God can see everything all the time, and so people feel judged by that particular God. A friend of mine said he had left Christianity, and I said, why? And I asked him why, and he says, I cannot believe in a God that kills a kitten every time I masturbate. You know what I mean? Meaning the God who's very vengeful and punitive over small things. And I went, wow, that's the God you were raised with? I'm sorry. So, perfectionism in mental health. Knowing how to recognize perfectionism and its effect has direct implications for our mental health. This is one of the points that is what we call trans-theoretical. So in the world of mental health care, you hear that there are dialectical behavioral therapists, there are cognitive behavioral therapists, there are psychodynamic therapists, there are person-centered therapists. There's lots of different ways, different philosophies, mindsets of treating human suffering. What we find is that these ideas on perfectionism are utilized by anybody across these different schools of thought and psychotherapy. And so if you're a cognitive psychologist, you're going to be really curious about people stinking thinking, dichotomous thinking in particular, and you're going to address that in therapy. Okay? If you're psychoanalytic or psychodynamic, the old school lay on the couch, tell me about your mother kind of therapy, you're going to want to know where these ideas of perfectionism came from and address those internalized primary relationships. Like some of you may be wondering, what do you mean by internalized primary relationships? So think of your primary 2 caregivers growing up. Okay? For some of you, it's going to be a mother and a father, or a mother and a grandmother, or a father and an uncle. Like, think of who your primary caregivers were growing up. Now, fast forward to today. Are they the exact same people today that they were back then? No. In fact, they're often very different. People change over time. And so therefore, when people are thinking about and responding to and reacting to the messages that they were given growing up, it's by a parent that changed decades ago. Sometimes a decade ago, sometimes decades upon decades ago, right? So that's one thing that more psychoanalytic traditions do, is to help people get in touch with that internalized parent from decades ago and to undo that particular relationship and to start a new relationship with the actual living parent today. Or the idea of a parent if the parent has passed on. So one of the fancy terms for this, and I love this, this is a $10 phrase for y'all. Perfectionism is transdiagnostic and polytherapeutic. I double dog dare you to use that in a sentence this week. Well, I learned that perfectionism is transdiagnostic and polytherapeutic. To use it well, let's talk about what that means. Transdiagnostic means perfectionism dynamics go across a bunch of different diagnoses. We see perfectionism with obsessive compulsive disorder. Probably that one's the most obvious. We see it with generalized anxiety disorder. We see it with major depressive disorders. We see it, surprisingly enough, with some post-traumatic stress disorders, especially in the case of sexual abuse and religious and spiritual trauma. Okay? We see it with even some kind of off-the-wall, you'd never guess, but personality disorders. Like you all know about obsessive compulsive disorder, the anxiety disorder, but there's also obsessive compulsive personality disorder, where the person doesn't have the anxiety-provoking obsessive thoughts and then the compulsive behaviors to deal with those thoughts. Instead, they just organize their whole life to be flawless. And so we see the effects of perfectionism even in personality disorders like schizoid, in dynamics like borderline, or even antisocial. Like if I can't live up to your rules, screw that, I'm going to live my own life and not care what society has to say. So it keeps cropping up in all of these very interesting ways. If you get good at recognizing perfectionism and treating it, then this one skill set you have in your bag as a treatment provider will help clients across ages, cultures, a whole bunch of other things, and diagnostic groups. And so it's a very important skill set to have in your treatment bag. So once an individual experiences perfectionistic thoughts and behaviors, it can create that cycle we talked about earlier. Because if I have perfectionistic absolutistic thinking, meaning it's this standard or nothing, then that often perpetuates the shame cycle that can get us in so much trouble. Okay, so where does it come from? We're going to talk now about two processes. It's the historical and cultural process, because this goes deep in American society. And we're going to talk about how that manifests in interpersonal relationships. So, some thinkers that kind of planted the seeds, or very much planted the seeds of this, is Aristotle, Augustine, Petrarch. We'll talk about some others like Emerson here in a moment. But one of the things that they did is they separated the individual from relationship. And they did it very cleverly and very carefully in their philosophies. One of the things we take for granted today is this idea that actually is an idea that started in philosophy that was undoing previous ideas about human nature. Okay, and it's kind of common sense today. For example, Adam, you and I go back now about a year. You know me. What am I thinking?
I don't know.
See? Why can't you read my mind?
Good question.
They're inputting you on the spot.
Because we're different people.
Because we're different people, exactly. And so that's one of the things where we can really feel that separation between self and other a lot of the time, where what happens inside of other people can be mysterious to us. I'm going to put you on the spot again, bud. What is your sweetheart's favorite food?
Her favorite food, Reese's peanut butter cups.
Okay, so she has very good taste. He said Reese's peanut butter cups. Okay? And so if she has an opportunity to buy a treat and she buys Nerds clusters instead of peanut butter cups, would that be mildly or very surprising to you?
It definitely would be out of the norm.
It would be out of the norm, right? So on the one hand, it seems like what happens inside the bodies of other people, their thoughts, their feelings, their values, seems like a mystery to us, that there's this unassailable gulf between I and thou, between me and you, right? That what goes on inside of other bodies is a total mystery to us. And I'd like to honor that. It can be. I'd also like to honor that if that were true, that other people were totally unrelatable and we couldn't predict them and guess and kind of have a sense of what was going on inside them, human relationships would become impossible. Driving in heavy traffic here this morning, there is a feel for the flow of traffic. And if you're paying attention, capital P, capital A, paying attention, you can get with the flow of traffic. Okay? I don't know if any of you are dancers. I love to dance with my sweetie. And I don't have to tell her, okay, sweetie, step back with your right foot as I step forward with my left foot. That there is a rhythm, there's a flow to relationships. Like the other day, I was watching two of my best friends cook in their kitchen. It was inspiring. I'm sitting on the couch, and we're hollering back and forth at each other, getting caught up. We haven't seen each other in a year. And we're hollering back and forth at each other. And he and his wife, or she and her husband, were dancing beautifully in the kitchen. They weren't even consciously aware of the ways in which they were subtly navigating one another's physical presence as though they had a psychic link and psychic connection together. As though they were, to use the old term, of one flesh. Okay? Some of you have felt that flow. Musicians, for example. When I sit down and I hit an open G string on my bass guitar and I start the rhythm going, and then the guitarist comes in and the drummer comes in, we don't know where this is going to go, but we're all doing it together. How is that possible if we can't read one another's minds? How many of you have had that experience with one of your children where you just knew something was up? Right? I see a bunch of head nods. How? You're not linked to them. You're not sharing a body with them. So one of the things that for millennia uncountable, people understood who they were in relation to other people. And these philosophers, over time, their ideas slowly undid that, where we were made more and more isolate within our bodies and were taught from the time we were younger more and more that we are separate individuals from everybody else. And so this has led to the American ideal of what we call ontological individualism. So ontology is when we're talking about the nature of the reality of a thing. Okay, anytime you hear some big academic like me say, well, we're discussing ontology, that's really simple-minded stuff. All they're talking about is the nature of reality. Okay, we just use code words to make ourselves sound smart. Okay, so ontological individualism is the idea that you are fundamentally, everything about you, everything that you are is within your body, is bound within your flesh. That your thoughts, your feelings, your values, who you are, your identity, all of that is within you. And that there's nothing shared with other people. Now you can share it through words, but then that's just subjective and there's biases and people can't really know where you're coming from. It's all drama and just watch some TikTok videos and oh my gosh, it's hopeless, the human condition. Okay, ontological individualism is really pervasive in our society. That everything essentially on who you are is within you. Now, one of the things that we have is an outgrowth of this, and we see this starting in the 1950s, and it really culminates with the hippie movement in the 1960s. The I just got to be me movement. And that is people thought, well, if I am a being within myself, if I'm a person and everything I am is inside of me, then I need to get in touch with who that person is. I got to find out who I really am. And then I need to live that in order to be authentic in the world. So I need to get in touch with who I am, and then I need to live that out in the world, and I need to express myself. Okay? Hence expressive individualism. Who you are happens within you. You need to dig deep inside of you to find out who that is, and then you need to express it in the world. The reason why that movement took off is because people could then finally start acknowledging and owning thoughts and feelings that they had had for years that culture would normally keep a heavy lid on. I want free love, free sex, I want to do all the drugs I want, right? And they would fight for that so they could express who they really were. Now that's kind of the darker side of it. The lovelier side of it, rock and roll, right? That there were a lot of ways of expressing oneself that used to be suppressed that now people would express. And we still see that language in our society, 80 years later. That there are people who really think that they have an internal self, that they need to dig down and find out who that is, and then they need to express that self. Okay? Expressive individualism. One of the things that rapidly began to happen, though, is when what the person was expressing was harmful to other people. For example, I was in a group therapy group training, if that makes any sense. So it's a bunch of us therapists, we're together, and we're putting group therapy in order to train us on these new modalities of group therapy. And it was with a very sophisticated, erudite, they sip their wine, listen to freeform jazz kind of crowd, right? Very bougie. And I felt like a fish out of water being an old dumb redneck from Utah, but hey, when in Rome. So I'm hanging out with them, and a couple of the group members are expressing their authentic internal self. One of them, for example, he's a very tall, dark, handsome therapist from Oslo, turns to my friend Barbara, who's a very lovely, curvy woman, and he says, right now, and I'm just expressing my truth, I want to bury my face between your bosoms and have you hold me. And Barbara, speaking her authentic self, was, ew, like that. So what do we do when what people's authentic self is intrusive of boundaries, if not directly violent to other people's well-being? And so what we see rapidly developing in the 1960s is this notion of liberal individualism. Liberal individualism doesn't come from liberal versus conservative. It comes from the notion of liberation, freedom. And that is, you are free to get in touch with whoever you believe you are and to express whoever you believe you are insofar as it does not get in the way of other people's freedom to be who they are. So this is what we do behind closed doors doctrine in America. If what you're doing is behind closed doors and it doesn't affect anybody else, knock yourself out, right? That's liberal individualism. Now, it may be kind of puzzling, what does this have to do with perfectionism? Well, this is where our good friend Waldo comes in. So Ralph Waldo Emerson is this poet, and he really, really eloquently articulated just what Americans really are. Just like what a man should be. You know, he's living in this little tiny cabin on a lake and just really contemplating about the internal nature of himself and writing about how man is an island unto himself, that all we ever really have is us individually. He also wrote a lot about the beauty of nature, which I appreciate. I find that poetry far more compelling. But he's really just talking about this is just what it means to be. You're just all alone in the world, right? All you've got is you. And of course, as an angsty teenager, I was like, yeah, all I got is me, man. I'm the only one I can really count on. Nature is beautiful. People suck. Yeah. Ooh, feels so gothic. And here's the thing. In a poetry class in college, I read about Ralph Waldo Emerson. He comes from some privilege, and while he's just being Mr. Rugged individual, living in wilderness, just a man unto himself, his mommy would drop off food every day and pick up all of his laundry. Well, he's all rugged. Right? That dispelled it for me right there. Really? You know, there are some people, I don't know if you see their YouTube videos, where they'll go out into the bush of Australia with a knife and a match, and they will build an entire home for themselves and live there for a year. Okay? That's what Waldo said he was doing, but really mommy was taking care of him the entire time. So old Emerson lost a lot of credibility with me. But we find when it comes to this instantiation of individuality, that this is where we start to admix individualism with perfectionism. Because is anything the fault of context if you are an individual? Like, can I go to my type 2 perfectionistic boss, that other Orion, you're 20 minutes late? Can I go to them and say, context? Or will they blame me as an individual because my reality is internal to me? You're right, they blame me as an individual. That we lose touch and we lose sight with context, because we're all individuals. So therefore, if we're depressed, whose fault is that? Society's? Economies? No, it's your fault, because you're an individual. So therefore, you need to come to me as a therapist, and we'll dig down deeply inside of you and find those irrational beliefs inside your psyche that are causing you to be depressed. And we'll contradict those beliefs and then help you think more positive, happy thoughts. For those of you that are therapist types, which I think is most of you in the room, I hope you're like me where you feel kind of guilty about doing that. When inflation goes up, do mental health problems go up or do they go down? They go up, thank you. Several of you get that. So is it my individual's client's fault that they can't make rent, that they're working 40 hours a week and going to school full time, and on their 40-hour-a-week job, budgeting very carefully, they can't even afford rent and utilities? Is it their fault? According to individualists, yes, it is. They should do some side hustles, side gigs, sleep is optional, things like that. I think I shared with you guys the story of my two daughters. They were graduating from high school at the same time, and I raised my children to be hardworking and independent. And I come home from school one day, and they meet me at the door, and they're in power suits. These little 18-year-old girls are in power suits. Dr. Draper, we need to talk to you. And immediately I felt a kid like I was in trouble. You know, like, oh, what'd I do? And so we go upstairs. They had a PowerPoint ready. They had everything going on. And they showed me economy. They said, Dad, when you were in college, you made $10 an hour, and rent for a one-bedroom apartment was $200 a month. Okay? Tuition was a quarter of what it is now. They broke it all down for me. Utilities were much cheaper back then. My car payment was $50 a month. Broke all that down for me. And then they showed me, click on the next slide, the reality today. Wages are now $20 an hour, but rent is $1,800 a month. Car payment is $560 a month. You guys get the picture? And so they said, you raised us that when we were 18 and graduated from high school, we were to move out. And they said, please, Dr. Draper, tell us how we can afford to move out. And I was sitting there I couldn't get the math to work. You know, I'm doing head math, pulling out a little calculator. I can't get it to work. And so then I said, okay, what's your proposal? Then they clicked on the next slide, our proposal. Here's what we'll pay in rent. It will be equivalent to our income. So you paid $200 a month rent at $10 an hour. We would like to pay $400 a month rent on $20 an hour, right? Mathematically, that's the same proportion. Here's what we would like to do here. Here's what we'd like to do here. So here's what we'd like to do here. Do we have a deal? Yeah, they got me. Not that I felt like bad that they got me. It's that I was out of touch. It reminded me of when my dad said, well, I worked part-time and never had to go into debt for college. Dad, tuition in your day was $20 a semester. You know, going to UVU, which is one of the cheapest institutions in the region, like it competes with Salt Lake Community College, is $3,300 a year. That's $1,700 a semester about. $1,650 if you want to be specific. You guys get where I'm coming from? Like, it's a different world now. And we wonder why our teenagers and our young adults have such catastrophically high rates of anxiety and depression. And again, they come to a therapist. Therapists are trained that all people are individuals. And so most therapies are individualistic therapies. And so most therapists then sit down with their individual clients suffering individual problems in an individualistic society and then treat the person. Did you know that therapy types are least likely to take pro bono clients compared to lawyers? Yeah, wrap your head around that. Like, we love evil lawyer jokes, but lawyers are more likely to take for-free clients or sliding scale clients than therapists are. Because when we measure the individualism assumptions of lawyers, they're actually a little bit lower than among therapists. Therapists are very well taught that individuals are individuals and that their reality exists inside of them. So if you want to change somebody's reality, you change the individual. Yeah, you're right. There's one exception to that, and that's like social workers who become therapists usually think more society and culturally. It's like many years ago, it's been about 15 years ago, there was a change to Medicaid in the state of Utah which was going to cut mental health funding. And so a group of us got together. We rented a big old van, like 15-passenger van, and we drove up to the Capitol Rotunda and we were protesting. And there was a moment when we were standing at the podium and we're kind of emceeing the crowd. And out of curiosity, I said, okay, how many people here are marriage and family therapists? Not a single hand. There was like 300 people under the rotunda. And I said, okay, how many of my fellow psychologists? Not a single hand went up. I said, clinical mental health counselors. About 20 hands came up. And then I said, social work. Everybody else cheered. Right? So there is an exception to that there are therapist types who are aware of sociocultural dynamics and will try to change what's going on in our society in order to improve the well-being of the members thereof. Okay, so back to history and culture. I'm really fascinated by a distinction between self-esteem and self-efficacy. Because these are big deal things in our society. Self-esteem and self-efficacy. We want to raise our children to have a high self-esteem, right? We want them to feel good about themselves. Yeah. What happens when you have a child who feels good about themselves and does whatever they want no matter who it hurts? What do we call them? Exactly, narcissists, psychopaths, very good. And so that's what we call them. And so why are we so big on self-esteem? Well, it's because we're worried about the other side. And that is people with a very low self-esteem tend to really struggle in life. So high self-esteem is good, but if it's too high, it's a problem. If self-esteem is bad, that can be a mild problem, but if it's too bad, it can be downright debilitating. So the point is this emphasis on the self. Like, another one is self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is the assumption of how effective I am to create change in my world, to get things done. Psychologists for years thought those were the two of the same things. If you believe in yourself, you can do anything. Well, it turns out there are people who have very low self-esteem, but you give them a task to do, they just assume they can do it. They have very high self-efficacy. But self-efficacy does not necessarily feel good when you have a low self-esteem. Like the other day, for example, my air conditioning went out. So here we are, Utah, August, no AC. Our houses are not designed anymore to handle Utah summer with no AC, right? So we're dying. So I call my buddy Leon, and I say, Leon, you used to work HVAC. He's a diesel mechanic now, but you used to work at HVAC. Can you come over and look at my AC? And so he does. Within an hour, he has it fixed. And I go, thank you so much, Leon. I'm very impressed. Like, I can't think of anything that every problem I've had, from plumbing to HVAC to electrical, you seem to know how to do everything. And he goes, that's because everything's easy. But he has a very low self-esteem. He thinks very poorly of himself. And therefore, if he does something incredible, it doesn't matter. So his self-efficacy doesn't help him feel any better, but it helps me appreciate him as a friend because he's very generous with how effective he is. So one of the things we have here, again, is the emphasis on the self. And that's because of this notion, again, of atomism. So this is the word we're going to assign to the notion that you are reduced, atomized into a person society in our own eyes, right? I would like to think I see you differently than that, and it takes practice to break out of the individualistic assumption, but that you're just an atom, just one individual atom. apart from all other individuals, that you are self-contained, you're just separate from, you're like an element unto yourself, right? And so the very notion of this, self-esteem and self-efficacy, assumes atomism. Now, we can kind of test that and see that these ideas of self-esteem and self-efficacy are somewhat flawed. They're good ideas on the one hand, on the other hand, no idea is complete. Think of the people you associate with, that when you're with them, you feel good about yourself, or you forget how much you hate yourself. Okay? Are we on the same page? Like there's a phenomenon called ambiversion. Ambiversion is when somebody is an introvert until they get to know you and then become more and more engaged and find more and more nourishment and energy in relating to you. But at first, your company depletes them, but once they feel comfortable, your company energizes them. It's called ambiversion, right? Introverts are drained in the company of other people. Extroverts are energized in the company of other people. Some people, they're really introverted until they get to know you, and then they become more and more extroverted. We on the same page? Well, it turns out 70% of Americans are actually ambiverted. But when we look at the personality tests in psychology, it's extrovert to introvert. There are people you don't know how you're going to feel in relation to them until you relate to them. And then once you relate to them, then there are some relationships that will continue to drain you. Then there are other relationships that will energize you. And so you want to nurture the relationships that energize you and probably have some boundaries around the relationships that deplete you. It seems like Americans have the right idea with this ambiversion thing. But you notice that both of those do not depend on the individual, but on the relationship. So maybe we're not atoms after all. So in interpersonal relationships, where does perfectionism come from? Well, when we read the literature in psychology, there's this notion that kids are suggestible. Okay, suggestibility is a really interesting word in psychology because this gets back to the practice of hypnotherapy. Hypnotherapy is where you hypnotize somebody in order to treat their mental health problems. In graduate school, that was one of the many trainings I got. It was really cool. I thought I could cure smoking and all these problems. Turns out hypnotherapy doesn't actually do very well at any of those things, but it's a really cool concept. And so when somebody is induced into that hypnotic state, that's what we call an induction, when somebody, you are getting very sleepy, right? Dangling the watch in front of you. And once you're in that state where you're quasi-conscious, that is induction into that state. And then in that state, you are highly suggestible. So some of you may have seen like magicians or comedians do this where you will forget your own name. On 3, I will snap my fingers and you will wake up. 1, 2, 3. What is your name? And the person goes, and they can't remember. They were in a suggestible state. And in that suggestible state, they were led to believe certain things. Well, as kids, we were in a suggestible state. It takes a long time for people to grow less and less suggestible. Although that varies by IQ, interestingly enough, that some people remain in a suggestible state their entire life. Therefore, they're very prone to listening to and believing propaganda, messages from other people, things like that. But most people, average IQ or higher, tend to grow less and less suggestible over time. So the point that they're like 12 or 13, it's hard to convince them of anything, right? Those of you with teenagers know where I'm coming from. But when they were little, you could get them to believe in Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy or the Easter Bunny, right? They were that suggestible that they could believe in fantastic things that they would never be able to sense or touch directly because of their suggestibility. And so we as people are very innately suggestible when we're young. And so because of that, we are prone to 2 dynamics called grandiosity and perfectionism. And we see these both very loudly in our society today. Grandiosity is this notion that I need to be awesome in order to accept myself or for other people to accept me. I need to be the center of attention. I need to show off how I'm doing. My house needs to look like a Pinterest page, or I need to be the best athlete, or whatever else. There's that pressure to be awesome. And that's gotten worse in our society. Like, oh geez, it's been, how long ago was 2002? 23 years ago. I was consulting with the Snickers, the company that owns Snickers, like Hershey. And they had this real big push of you can find a magic number. This is when the internet was really getting big, right? You can find a magic number in a Snickers bar, and if you type that in and it matches, you're a millionaire. The first time they did that, they made all sorts of money. They sold so many Snickers bars. And then the second time they did it, a decade later, they hardly sold any Snickers bars. They're like, what's going on? So they hired a group of us psychologists, a focus group. We went in and we talked about it. And one of my colleagues said, we'd like to run a focus group of your primary customers, which are people from the age of 16 to 26. Those are the primary purchasers of candy back then. And we want to ask them what they want. And so we ran some focus groups with young adults, and what we found is they didn't care about money so much unless it made them look cool. What they cared about was being famous. And so Snickers ran the ad again. Again, it's been 23 years ago. Some of you remember it. If your magic number matches our number, you will win an uncredited walk-on role in these sitcoms. They sold a record number of Snickers bars. Now, old men like me were like, I'd rather have $1 million. You know what I mean? But grandiosity has changed. We started doing things like trying to make sure nobody's self-esteem was hurt by making sure everybody felt good after a competition. Like you hear some critics of that go, well, everybody got a trophy. In my day, only people who won got a trophy. Well, that had its own set of problems. But we introduced a new set of problems by telling everybody that they're fantastic and they're awesome, because when we're not around, nobody's telling them that. And therefore, they're desperate for it, so they reach for it. I want to be the center of attention. I want to think that I'm cool. I need as many likes on Facebook. I need as many likes on Instagram. I need 2 million Snapchats a day, too many snaps a day. You guys get where I'm coming from? Eyes on me, eyes on me. That's grandiosity. And it's very acute in Gen Z and Gen Alpha. So current high school students and current college students. And then perfectionism is one of those where I need to be flawless in order to be loved. And nobody can see my flaws. It would just be horrible, awful if somebody could see that I'm actually a flawed person. So with these, they come through both social, cultural, just the era that we live in, but very directly in the homes that we have. For example, just thinking of my generation, so comfortably Gen X. And my parents' standard was straight A's were the bare minimum acceptable standard academically. If I had a B or lower, then I would need to justify myself. If I got straight A's, there was no commentary. I was meeting the bare minimum standard, right? I see this all the time, hearing stories from my sweetheart. She's a high school chemistry teacher, and she teaches concurrent enrollment. So she's teaching 15-year-olds UVU chemistry classes, and they get Utah Valley University credit if they pass. And so those kids don't stress my wife out very much. It's the parents. I just noticed that Junior got a 75.1% on this exam. What are you doing and failing as a teacher that my perfect baby little boy only got a 70? You need to learn how to teach, right? And my wife takes that very personally. It really hurts her feelings. But imagine what the kid's going through at home, right? Well, baby boy, you can do anything. And that comes across as you should, must, ought do anything, right? Live my perfect standard for you. One of the things, though, is sometimes it's far more subtle than that. I was consulting on a case a couple of years ago where a therapist colleague of mine, and I'm sorry I don't have a lot of particulars, keeping it confidential, treating a college student with an eating disorder, a young man with an eating disorder. And it's intractable. It's really hard. Like he's been an inpatient twice, he's nearly died, and he's out in individual therapy again and really trying to work hard on this. And so finally, after a while, just in desperation, my colleague, the therapist, told this young man, have you told any of your family members about your struggles? And he was racked with terror and said, no, I would just die if my parents found out about this. And so my colleague just planted the suggestion, just the idea of, hey, well, maybe someday when you feel safe, like of your 2 older siblings, which of them would you feel safe with? Just go, oh no, neither. They're both perfect. They're beautiful. They're amazing men. One's in medical school. The other one's in law school. I'm the only flawed one in the family. So much to my colleague's surprise, his client did it that weekend. Called the eldest brother, the one in medical school, and said, hey, I'm really struggling with body image stuff. I hate the way I look. I got a ton of body dysmorphia. I've been hospitalized twice this year. I didn't want to bother the family because, perfection is the bare minimum standard. The brother bursts into tears and says, bro, I just got out of treatment for this myself. On a conference call, they call the middle brother, and guess what? You guessed it, same thing. And he bursts in tears because he thought he was the only one. Together, they call mom and dad. And guess what? Dad is a very handsome man. He's very famous. I don't know what he's famous for. My colleague just said he's very famous. And Dad would stand in front of the mirror for hours, flexing and clucking at himself disapprovingly as he got older. That Dad's physique was never good enough. He was never healthy enough. He never looked young enough. Like as he got older, his muscles got softer and softer, even though he worked out all the time. He lost his hair, all of these things. And Dad was subtly very critical of himself, especially around weight gain. His sons, who idolized his dad, got in that same habit at a very young age. Because if their amazing, handsome, successful, gorgeous dad is inadequate, then how could they ever possibly live up? So sometimes the messaging is through a process of what we call introjection. So there's explicit introjection. You should believe this, right? That's explicit introjection. Implicit introjection is where we just absorb the behavior and the values and the neuroses of the people around us growing up. That's implicit introjection. And so we find that a lot of this innate suggestibility is actually from this implicit process. Yes, it can be explicit too, but it's surprising how often it's implicit, that people just take up the values of the people around them that are important to them. So one of the things that we find, and this is the language I would like you guys to look for, this is coming from the work of Albert Ellis, who is a rational therapist. Be aware when you or somebody else are confusing desires with demands. Desires are, I would like this to be this way. Demands are, it should, must, ought, shouldn't, mustn't, oughtn't. It has to be this way, or I will just die. Okay, should, must, ought. Now, there are some things that it's understandable. For example, if you would like to live, food, water, shelter, safety are good ideas, right? So maybe if you want to live, maybe you should eat well. Maybe you should have shelter. Maybe you should be safe, water, etc. Right? But you notice the should comes from the desire. I would prefer to live, therefore I'm going to do the things that will perpetuate my life. But that is a desire. So it's an I like to rather than I have to. So one of the things we find a lot, the more perfectionistic people are, the more and more they use should, must, ought kind of language. Ellis had a humorous way of intervening with this with his clients. When clients would use a lot of this language, confusing desires with demands, he would go, goodness gracious, you're shooting all over my office. And if they used like must, mustn't, he'd go, you're masturbating all the time. You've got to stop masturbating, right? He had these humorous ways of intervening. But I'd like you to really think about this. Start sensitizing yourself to should type language. Because it's really should, like God or science said that this has to be this way. Or have they confused a desire, I would like my day to unfold this way, with a demand. It should be this way, and if it's not, that would be just awful. I would just die. So, the other day, a non-traditional student came down to my clinic office in Springville, fed me lunch, we had a lovely conversation, and she was asking for advice on getting into graduate school. And I noticed she was uncharacteristically tightly wound. And so I said, Jenna, what is going on, my dude? Like, you are stressed. And she goes, I've got an exam coming up in this class, and I'm not really feeling prepared. I don't know what the professor wants, and it's really stressing me out. And I go, you've got a very, very high GPA. Like, why would this one exam stress you out? And she goes, well, you know, you got to have like really good grades to get into graduate school. I'm like, you have really good grades. Like, you got 1.5 semesters left, dude. You gold. And she goes, no, you don't understand. So what'll happen is I'll take this test, and I've done the math, and if I fail this test, my grade will drop from an A to a B. And once it's a B, then that will lower my GPA by this minuscule percentage, and that will take me just under the line that I imagine that the Graduate School Analysis Committee and Admissions Committee probably has. And therefore, I won't get into graduate school. And because this is really the only skill set I have, and the only thing I'm good at doing is cooking fast food, but I can't feed 2 babies, working fast food, or afford rent, so we're going to be homeless. And when we're homeless, I won't know what to do. And so I'm going to have to prey on other homeless people and like kill them for their food in order to feed my babies. No wonder she was panicking. It went from she feels a little unprepared for an exam to murdering hobos. That fast. I was very grateful I wasn't a homeless person at that moment because I was worried Jenna would start preying on me. Okay, do you have food? Give me your food. Okay? So one of the things that happens is she has a desire to go to graduate school. That is an understandable desire. We can honor, we can value, we can support that desire, help her achieve her goal. But she has confused that with the demand. Must, ought, should, or death. must, ought, should, or disaster, or sin, or hell, or whatever else, right? That we need, should, must, ought for this, and that ratchets the anxiety way high, right? Or deepens the depression way low. Like either way, confusing with desires with demands is how the shame, it's the vehicle behind the shame of toxic perfectionism. And so we got to start with ourselves. Like if we're treatment providers, maybe we get to check our own language. How often are we shoulding, masturbating, awfulizing? How many are we have to when it's something we actually prefer? So this is where your therapeutic skill of reframing comes in handy. That's why for those of you that have filled out insurance paperwork and they'll go, okay, what skills did you use with your individual or with your client? Cognitive reframing is one of the top of the list skills that insurance companies look for, like Medicaid, for example. They want to see that you can take these toxic assumptions and help reframe it into something positive or something at least less damaging. Okay, so cognitive reframing works really well. Really? Should you? And you would just die? What's the worst that could actually happen? You know what I mean? Now be very careful because like some of my redneck buddies have bumper stickers on their big trucks that says, but did you die? Right? Be careful because that can be both validating and challenging as well as deeply invalidating depending on the client, depending on the context. So what you want to do is figure out what is the worst that could happen and can you survive it? Right? Now Jenna's not my client. I don't have time to really take session after session to slowly turn that train around, but I did get to tease her mercilessly because that's what friends do. And so I just teased her about, really, this is, like, you're murdering hobos. Like, you're not going to be able to afford a gun. Should you not go to DI and buy some rusty knives? Like, how do we need to handle this murdering hobo thing? And then I, more helpfully and less sarcastically, shared stories with her. I served on admission committees for universities from 1996 until 2023. So that's a long time. Oh boy, that's a long time, right? 29 years. And so one of the things that, well, 26 years, yeah. So one of the things that we found is that the graduate admissions committee, are also in a crisis during this. Not as much as the applicants, I appreciate. Because imagine you're sitting on a graduate admissions board, and it's for a doctoral program in clinical or counseling psychology. You have 328 applicants. You can only take 8 of them. 100 of these students would be amazing to work with. If you're in a clinical mental health counseling admissions committee, you can only take 40, and you have 200 applicants, 150 of whom would be amazing to work with. And I said, that's part of the issue. You're already in the amazing category. I'm sorry to increase your anxiety, but it gets down to luck. And there are some things you can do to sway the luck needle, to load the dice a little bit in this game of chance called applying for graduate school. Do you know the professors on the admissions committee? Well, no. Find out who's on the admissions committee. Who you know is a lot of your interpersonal success. Like, yeah, I've got a Vita that's pages and pages long, and a lot of cool things on it, but you know how I get jobs? It's all in who I know. Especially the harder the job is to get, who you know becomes more and more important. Some of you may wonder, why did this supervisor get promoted when they're the least competent person in the building? And then you realize, oh, well, look at all who they know who's on the hiring committee, right? So I'm sorry it has a dark edge to it, but you can use this and work it in your favor. Who do you know? So I'd like to introduce the idea of imperfectionism. That this is counterculture. This is us fighting 1,000 years of history by saying, you know what? Flawlessness does not exist and was never the goal. It was artificially invented by a bunch of philosophers who felt they were pretty narcissistic, thought they were super special princess pony snowflakes, and said, you all need to be like us, all self-contained individuals. Now, like Ralph Waldo Emerson, the poet, turned out his mommy was taking care of him the entire time. When we look into the history of these other philosophers who are saying, you need to be a rugged individual all into yourselves, they were being taken care of by other people all the time. For those of you that know and love or have loved a narcissist before, how good are they at taking care of themselves? Not at all. How good are they at taking you for granted when you're the one actually taking care of them? Yep, and the narcissist won the philosophical battle. I'm here to humble us. We don't need to buy into their narcissistic BS. Here's a simple case. Let's take up 2 different spiritual trains of thought. Buddhism and Christianity. Now we got to go back a long ways because in America, American Buddhism is very individualistic and American Christianity is very individualistic. But where they started was not. In Buddhism, they call this phenomenon pratitya tsumutpada. It means interbeing, and that word means like together over time, changing together over time, right? It's not just static connection, but unfolding connection, interbeing. Who I am informs who you are, and who you are informs who I am. In the Christian tradition, a fellow named Jesus stands up on a rock and goes, "Be ye therefore perfect as my Father in heaven and I are perfect." Later on, the philosophers twist that as you need to be flawless, but that's not what it meant at the time. What it meant at the time is you need to be whole and complete in relation to other people as my Father is complete in me and I am complete in him. And some people go, what? Yeah, that's what it meant. I don't know if any of you guys were taught that, if you guys were raised religious. I know I wasn't taught that in church. I was taught I had to be flawless. But it turns out that's not what it means. For example, some people say, well, how can a God and a son be complete in one another, and how can we unfold in being together over time, like the Buddhists and the Christians? Well, okay, these are far more ancient philosophies than the modern American one. Let's go there. For me to be a father, what must also exist in my world? A child, right? I need daughters, I need sons, I need children that are mine for me to be a father. So if I call myself a good dad, what must be unfolding in relation to those kids? Do I come home and just beat them silly and sexually and physically abuse them, neglect them and say, you need to honor me because I'm your dad, so therefore your religion says you have to honor me because I'm your dad? Is that how it works if I call myself a good dad? Well, I provided for you, why aren't you grateful? No. It turns out it's a relational event, meaning that how I've had to raise each one of my children has to be subtly to very different than my other kids. My oldest son was autistic. Had to develop a whole new set of parenting strategies than the one I was raised with to raise an autistic child. But that didn't work for my very precocious, extremely bright daughter just younger than him, who to this day will joke with you, yes, I'm the middle child, but I was actually the oldest child, and she's telling you the truth. Okay? Record scratched, really grinding my gears. How do I go from nurturing one child who has a whole list of disabilities to nurturing another child who's in all the gifted and talented programs? Right? And then my very youngest son, neither of those. He's extremely athletic. The other two were brainy in their own ways. Now I go do stuff at school with a kid? What? Okay? So, good parenting, if I want to be whole and complete as a dad, I am whole and complete in relation to these children. Likewise, if they're endeavoring to be my children, they're endeavoring to relate to me as well. It tends to come more naturally to kids than it does for adults. But you get where I'm coming from? It is a relational event. And so, when it comes to this notion of imperfectionism, we also unfold over time. Have any of you been in a partnered relationship for more than a decade? Oh wow, a good number of you. Have you changed over the past 10 years? Has your love changed? Right? Have they changed? Have you all changed together? Do you relate in the same way? Aha, it just got tricky because in some ways yes, and in some ways it's had to change. You guys get where I'm coming from? Pratitya tsumutpada. You guys are unfolding in relation together over time. My sweetie, when I met her, there was money on the barrelhead of the church. Like literally people putting a pile of cash down. 3-to-1 odds they're divorced in a year. Do I hear 4-to-1 odds? Right? Because I have a very large personality. My sweetheart at the time was what they called mousy back then. She was very quiet, she was very timid, didn't make eye contact really well. Like on our first date, I had to order dinner for her, if you guys remember that story. And so you'd never guess today, my wife boss today, right? She can walk into a classroom of teenagers and own that space with 30 kids in the room, right? Very different person. I've actually mellowed out a lot, right? If you guys sit and talk to me individually, now I actually speak very softly. Not because I'm trying to, I'm just old and tired, right? I wasn't when I was younger. And so we change over time and we change together. And part of the magic of a Buddhist sense of loving other people is intending to grow in that change together, pratitya tsumutpada, right? So we have this notion from ancient Christianity, be whole in relation to other people. Be aware of other people, care for them, love them, accept their love, right? Pratitya tsumutpada, that we unfold together over time, that we are becomings, that we are changing. And this is important to be aware of and to acknowledge and to own. So imperfectionism means we don't have to be flawless. If I am without flaw, do I need you? No, I don't. I can feed myself, clothe myself, love myself, provide for all of my own needs. So therefore, what do I have need for other people? And for those of you that travel internationally, you wonder why Americans have a reputation for being so narcissistic? Because we've been taught for a young age, we don't need anyone, and we shouldn't need anyone. This philosophy turns that on its head. You do need people. This therapeutic philosophy, we are most often injured in relation to other people, to our soul. Therefore, what will heal people the most is relationship. That which hurts us the worst is also the medicine that can heal us, right? Galen, for example, the ancient Greek physician, observed that the difference between medicine and poison is dose. The father that emotionally abuses his children, you're not thinking of how you're making this family look. You should be ashamed of yourself, you son of perdition, is actually caring in an overdose sort of way that's poisoning the child. Right? He deeply, passionately cares. And it's destructive. It's poison. So what we need to do is lower the dose. Okay? So interbeing is acknowledging we're always already in relation to other people. There are people out there in your world who cannot see you at this moment. They may be miles to thousands of miles away, and your being matters to them. You're a part of their world. Sometimes it even feels supernatural. I don't know that it is. I'm not making that claim. But when I get a call from my wife saying, I can't get a hold of our daughter, I know something's wrong. Can you go find her? And I do, and she's in the midst of a diabetic crisis. How did my wife know? From 3 miles away. Right? Now, does that happen 100%? Can we do experiments on it and see if we can recreate it in the lab? Nope. The second you eliminate confounds, you eliminate the very sources of connection we have with each other. But it does make me wonder sometimes why I still cry over someone that we lost years ago. It's because they still matter. I don't know if they still exist, but they still matter to me. So endeavoring presence, that when you're with people, attend to them, right? Look people in the eye. Try to be aware of other people. And of course, authenticity, this changes the definition of authenticity. Where authenticity is not, I need to dig inside myself for who I truly am and then express that outwards into the world, or I will feel existentially guilty that I'm not living true to myself. Instead, this is, yeah, if you have been abused and oppressed where you've never learned to speak a voice that feels like you, then as a therapist, I'm going to help you learn to speak your voice. Right? That's important. Let's figure out how you feel. Let's pull out that corny little feelings chart and let's do that together. Help break down that alexithymia and that suppression and oppression that you've lived under. That's a very important skill. Please do that. But I don't delude myself into thinking that they are without relation to other people, that they're still in relationship to other people, even though they're learning to speak their voice. That authenticity is not an individual event, it's a relational one. What is authentic to my youngest son is trying to figure out how to play Warhammer 40K, the miniature tactics game, right? It's got rules and then even more rules, and this affects that, which affects this, which modifies that. It's very confusing. I'm doing my best. I love this kid. I'm going to try this out. We've been working on it for years. He's very patient with me. But if I grab one of my daughters and say, okay, I've learned that to love children, we have to play Warhammer 40K together. How's that going to work with my daughters who aren't even remotely interested in that? Right? Authenticity, if I'm striving to be authentic as a father, happens in relation to those children in a way that takes them into consideration when I'm being authentic. If I'm in a meeting with colleagues and there's an important policy decision that needs to be made, I could just stand up and be a good old Emersonian individual and say, my super special princess pony snowflake feelings are this, and so therefore I'm speaking my authentic voice, screw you hippies and what you think. This is the way it's going to be done, or my ego's going to get it, and we're going to have war here in this conference room. Or I can listen. I can figure out a way to express my voice in a way other people will hear, that I'm still speaking my voice, but in a way that will connect with other people. This turns authenticity from an individual process, I am authentic, to is our relationship authentic? Are we doing this together? Like in the case of marriage, One of the dead giveaways for those of you that do marriage counseling, that a marriage is failing and you're actually doing divorce counseling when you meet a new couple, is if one or both of them has contempt for the other one. If you see even the subtlest hint of disgust, you've got an uphill battle if you want to help them save this marriage. If the disgust is overt, the marriage has been over for a while, I'm sorry. Because they withdrew from the relationship and now can only see the other person as an object that is disgusting. And there may be good or bad reasons for that. But when two people are trying, even if they're fighting, like the other day I had two clients and they were at war with each other. One was in her office, another one was in his truck, and they were just, "Wah, you son of a rah, rah." And after a while they kind of paid attention. I'm just back smiling. They go, "Draper, what are you smiling about? You're supposed to stop us from fighting." And I go, "No, you guys care about each other so much you're fighting." You know what I mean? This is this close to you guys making mad, mad love tonight, because anger is a passionate emotion. You guys are all passionate about each other. Let's turn this around. I'll call the hotel, right? And so they laughed and we dispelled the moment with some humor, but they were still passionate about each other. Imagine you're trying to do couples counseling when they don't even care enough to talk. Authenticity happens in relation to the other. And when both are participating in that, whether it be parent and child, friend and friend, lover to lover, if they're both endeavoring the relationship, that is making that relationship authentic. Okay, so there's some imperfectionism techniques. I've got some books listed at the end that when I'm working with clients who come from a conservative Latter-day Saint background or a conservative Christian background, that their reading is written within those traditions that really counter perfectionism, okay? Help people think about things differently. Now, I've gotten feedback on some of these presentations like, "Draper, you're an enemy to Christianity." I'm not. I'm very well aware. I have clients that are alive and thriving because of their relationship within their churches. That they can go to a church meeting and hear, "We love you, we're here to help you try, all of us are doing our best, we're all a community, we're all in this together." I can have a different client in the same church meeting hear, "You're bad, you suck, you're awful." Same church meeting, right? I'm not an enemy to churches. What I'm an enemy for is guilting, shaming, angering, things like that. And I'm also not an enemy to my clients who hear things that way. That's often an introjected value from when they were younger, and to undo that. Okay? So there's readings and workbooks on perfectionism for both religious and secular clients. I've got a picture of Shafran's workbook on that, can be very helpful. For clients who are open to readings in Buddhism, I've got some bibliotherapy books from Thich Nhat Hanh. And so like Interbeing, No Mud, No Lotus, and Comfortable with Uncertainty by Pema Chodron. And so one of the things that I encourage, like regardless if my clients are Christian, indifferent to religion, more generally secular or Buddhist, is to please not demand that these authors be perfect. Like, I was working with a former Latter-day Saint client. He identified as an ex-Mormon the other day. And what destroyed him is he was taught that church leaders within his faith were perfect. And therefore, when he learned that they weren't, it destroyed him. Right? I've got other clients who are followers in the Mahayana Buddhist tradition, and they find out about the struggles of Thich Nhat Hanh or Pema Chodron, both of whom have lived very difficult lives, and both of whom have participated in their own difficult lives. And it destroys them, because they demand that the people writing on imperfectionism be themselves perfect in order for them to believe imperfectionism. Right? So that's an intervention you may need to do with your clients. These are deeply flawed people who are living deeply flawed lives and are trying their best to help themselves and help you by writing these books. Okay, another one is relational mindfulness. So a question I would like you to consider for yourself, and then keep this in mind for the people that you intervene with. Who makes the best of you possible? Who brings out the best in you? When you're defeated by life, because life will kick the crap out of you, who's the one that picks you up when you're bleeding on the ground? Who's the one that helps you believe that you can take another step? Who's the one that sees the potential of your dreams and will stand with you as you attempt them? Right? And for whom do you do that? Who do you lift up? Who do you encourage? Who do you see the best in when they cannot see it in themselves? intentional relationality. Right? I am going to have faith in you. So, who do you make possible? Who do you bring out the best in? The other thing is having it out with shame. Shame withdraws us from others and pushes others away at the same time. Shame is remarkably isolating. When you start realizing with a relational mindset, you don't have to live in shame anymore. For example, I am grossly incompetent when it comes to details. My private practice lost money for the first 10 years because I would forget to bill. I didn't think to run credit cards. All the basic business things most competent therapists know to do, it was a struggle for me to even remember. If you guys could see my personal calendar, I now have things booked out like detail with reminders in order for me to function. Right? Well, hopefully one of these days we'll have a lecture on how ADHD can be a superpower in certain relationships and with certain tools. And so my sweetheart, when I retired from academia, I said, okay, I'm going to do this clinical consulting, clinical practice thing full time. I really need your help. And my wife is so good at detail. She's a chemistry teacher, for crying out loud. She has anatomic, elemental levels of detail in her head. She can do it. And sure enough, Wednesday nights for 4 hours, she does all of my billing, all of my credentialing, everything else. She's employed by the company that we own. She draws a paycheck from it. It's been amazing. But if I thought I had to be all things to all people and I need to be Captain Perfect, I wouldn't have thought to ask her, and I'd still be losing money. One of the privileges of doing corporate consulting is I get to meet C-suite people all over the Western United States. From DirecTV to Groove Technology to a whole bunch of other businesses. And when I'm talking to folks in C-suites, one of the things they're very good at is asking for help and delegating. If they no, I can't ask for help. Womanly women and manly men don't ask for help. We have to be flawless and we have to be able to do all things. Mommy said I could do anything I set my mind to, so I can do this. Because if not, I'll be racked with mommy shame. No, they ask for help. That's how they're so successful. Like it's painful, like pulling teeth for me to go golfing. But watching these guys commiserate, ask each other for advice, etc., men and women, and it grows their careers. And there's the guys in the front line perpetually stuck in middle management. No, I ain't gonna ask for help. Only weak people ask for help. Well, congratulations, you're stuck. Where your rugged individualism is costing you relationships, and we get promoted in relation to other people. So business-wise, individualism is a bad idea. And so if we start looking at this relationally, we can look at what are our strengths and weaknesses. We can relate to those people who need our strengths, and we relate to other people who have strengths where we are weak, and together we thrive. One day I was asking an old school marriage therapist. I was 22 at the time, he was in his 80s. And I said, how would you define a good marriage? And he said, when you have one person who is 100% whole with their life and their struggles and everything else, and another person who's 100% whole and with their life and their struggles, and they come together and they create 300% capacity for one another. That it's not 200%, it's not additive, it's multiplicative. That they create more possibility for themselves and other people because they're both trying. And they're doing it together. Now me, I also like Alice Cooper, the famous rock star's definition of all marriage is two broken people who refuse to give up on each other. I like that one too, because it's essentially saying the same thing, but without the math. So it's like the other day. My neighbor just to the south, his grandkids are living with him right now because his daughter is between homes. And I get out of my car, and his little 8-year-old granddaughter comes, roaring up to me. Her brothers, are way past her. They're 10 and 11. They're past her down the road on their bigger bikes. And she comes, on her little big wheel, and she stops, and she looks up at me, and she goes, "You are the biggest, fattest man I've ever seen." And I went, "It's pretty cool, isn't it?" And she goes, "Yeah." And big wheels off, right? So she and I are now bros. But if I had done the shame thing of going, "That child's so rude, and I'm self-conscious about my weight, and I can't believe she said that, and screw that kid, neighbor, I'm now mad, we're feuding, we're beefing here." You see shame? Boom. We don't need to do that. She's 8, right? I can grow comfortable with the fact, yes, I'm very big. And she can be comfortable with the fact she can tell that to old Draper, and we bros. Okay? When you start thinking relationally, you're lessening the shame of the self and attending to the essential nature of the other. So ask questions, get curious. a colleague of mine asked me to watch an Apple TV show called Ted Lasso. Okay, very heartwarming, lovely little show. Glad she recommended it. And there's a scene where Ted's, he's an American, he's just gotten hired by an English, we call it soccer, they call it football team, and he's in a bar, and the very narcissistic former owner of the team he's working for comes in as all like posturing and everything, but all handsome and charismatic and mocking the American, and challenges him to a game of darts. And so sure enough, this former owner is an amazing dart thrower. And Ted starts with like something out of Princess Bride starts, and he's not doing well at first, and so wagers, hey, if I win the next round, you have to stay away from every game. But if I lose, then there'll be this other great thing you get. And of course the narcissistic owner goes, yeah, I've already beaten you once. And so the Ted goes, you know what you didn't do? And he changes hands. You didn't ask questions. You know what I mean? And then just throws a perfect game. And talks while he's throwing about how he used to play darts with his father every Saturday. How it's a family tradition. One of the things that will really help you is if you stop and ask questions. You got a supervisee coming in, they're 20 minutes late. Rather than going, you're 20 minutes late. Start with a question. What's going on? Are you okay? Next time you're really upset with yourself, hey, what's going on? Am I okay? What's the context that I'm responding to? It's not all going to be internal. Sometimes it's going to be mostly internal. Sometimes it's going to be mostly external. Sometimes it's somewhere in between. But to have it out with shame, it's okay. How you doing? Like Adam he didn't use these words, but I really appreciated the reminder. I wasn't stuck in traffic. I'm participating in traffic. I am traffic. If I weren't here, and if there was 1 in 10 of us that weren't there, this traffic would be flowing smoothly. But we're now all participating in traffic together. We're all doing our best to get to where we need to go. You see how that just changed from that person just cut me off to, yep, they're participating in traffic. And so that's when you have it out with shame with yourself. Hey, what's going on? And you have it out with shame with someone else. Oh, what's going on with you? So again, part of this is doing an assessment of strengths and weaknesses for self or other. We've already taught this. Like one of the things that one of my teachers in Buddhist psychotherapy had us do was like our 3rd meeting. She sat us down and she said, write down all of your weaknesses. And so we did. All the things we're just not very good at. Emotionally, cognitively, practically, long lists, right? And then she said, write down what you're good at. We struggled. Much shorter list. And so she confronted us on that. She goes, really, you're that flawed? Or you're just from a perfectionistic society, so you're hyper aware of your flaws. And you come from a world that assumes that perfectionism is the minimum standard. She said, I'd like you to rest on that and meditate on that. But for now, who are people that you know that are strong where you are weak? And who are people that you know that are weak where you are strong? Now go love them. Powerful intervention. You don't need to be strong in all things. Acknowledge your weaknesses without shame. Because my weaknesses can connect with you, and now we have a stronger relationship than if I was Mr. All Things Unto Myself Perfect. Some of you are very familiar with the Benjamin Franklin effect. If you ask somebody for help, and you ask them for a favor, and it's you're not exploiting them, and it's not manipulating them, it's genuinely you need help, they will feel closer to you having helped you. I notice my friends who refuse to ask for help don't have very many friends. Those of us that are pretty shameless, hey bro, my basement just flooded, and called 10 of your friends, and they come over and you clean up and feed them barbecue and everything else, got the grill going. Yeah, a lot more friends. Now somebody's saying, I don't need friends. Great, I do. But the older you get, the more and more you need at least a couple few good friends. There's a loneliness epidemic in this country, especially among men, and especially among men who, I don't need help. They die young. You've seen the data. It's been all over the news. Okay? You need to acknowledge where you're weak in order to have a strong relationship with someone else. So what can we do together that neither of us can do alone? The other notion is slow is fast. Do it consciously, deliberately, and right. Slow down. You're not in a hurry. Like trying to work with students. Cramming. I gotta use. Slow is fast. It's okay. Take a breath. Start a week early. Do a little bit every day. Like somebody said, Draper, how did you write a 300-page book in 2 months? Easy. You do it a little bit every day. Slow is fast. When you try to go, I've got 8 hours and I got to get 100 pages written. It's going to slow you down. Okay? I got to do this. It's got to happen right now. It's going to slow you down. Okay? Take a breath. Slow is fast. And of course, mindfulness. One of these days we'll come and we'll do like some mindfulness exercises. But scan your body, check in. How are you feeling, right? There are skills that we can develop. Please read up on them. And then, of course, we've talked about encountering the other. So really see people, like really try to listen first. Listen to hear, don't listen to respond. So kind of repeat to yourself what the other person is saying, and then say, hey, is this what you're saying? Or, oh, it sounds like you feel X because of Y. There's a whole bunch of listening skills to use. But the more you use them, the better you get at connecting with other people. And of course, acceptance. Learning to accept the unacceptable. What makes something acceptable or not is judgment. And some things are easy to judge. Like, as you guys know, I suffer from chronic pain. And it's hard to accept it sometimes when it's 4 a.m. and I'm hurting real bad. I can't sleep. But I noticed I hurt a lot worse when I'm like, it shouldn't be this way, and this sucks, and this is awful, and it shouldn't, no, must, shooting and masturbating all over the place, right, can exacerbate the pain. It's weird how that works. But by laying back and saying, well, I'm as comfortable as I can be in this situation, I'm going to snuggle up next to my sweetie, and I'm going to lay here and practice some breathing exercises. Would I prefer to have a pain-free night? I sure would. But I can accept that I am in pain. And I can accept that I'm snuggled up with a pretty girl. And I accept I'm in a warm, comfy bed. And I can accept that I can breathe. Right? All of those things can be accepted. And so there's a noting practice that we do where when I'm working with students or clients, we sit or we lay, depending on the environment, and we just touch everything that comes into awareness. Right? So if I'm thinking a thought, I acknowledge, hey, I'm thinking this thought. If I'm feeling something emotionally, then I say, I'm feeling this emotion. If I'm sensing something physically, like seeing something or hearing something, then I just note, oh, I'm hearing this noise. I'm feeling the surface of the floor. I'm seeing somebody walk into the room. And just practicing noting things without judging them. And the more and more you do that, the better and better you get at it over time. Now, when it comes to more of the old school psychology, treating yourself kindly. There is this belief, and it has caused a lot of good, but it also causes a lot of harm. How many of you have heard you have to love someone else before you can love yourself? Only one person. Wow, I've worked, the battle's over. So let's you and I talk, okay? It turns out that's not the way it works. In fact, sometimes how we learn to love ourselves is by being loved by others and loving other people in return. That you can love people not despite their flaws, but because of their flaws, then maybe you can start to do that for yourself, right? That, now don't get me wrong, there are some people who are so wrapped up in self-recrimination, self-criticism, etc., that they withdraw from relationship, and some self-acceptance will help them connect. That can happen too, right? So therefore, when we talk to them, hey, you need to learn to love yourself, that's where we're coming from with them. But in general, self-acceptance gets us out of the way of giving and receiving love with others. Self-love can often lead to, well, hopelessness, or it can lead to narcissism. It can help people learn to accept themselves. I'm great with that. I was very surprised when a colleague of mine would have her clients with low self-esteem look at themselves in the mirror and say 50 times, I love you, I love you, I love you, to their reflection. I was like, this is some hokey BS. Turned out it helped some of their clients. Did it help all of them? No, but it helped some of them. So I'm not going to take that off the table. But what I would say is, I see you and I accept you. So the other technique, and we'll kind of end on this one, is when you're stressing out, speak the voice of truth to fear. In Buddhism, we call it speak the voice of the Buddha. In Christianity, they say speak with the voice of Jesus. In general philosophy, it says speak truth to fear. So there's 3 versions of the same thing. Imagine somebody you know that you love and trust and who would never intentionally lead you astray. Okay? As you're laying and tossing and turning or stressed out of your mind in traffic, address yourself by the name they call you out loud and tell yourself what they would tell you, speaking truth to your stress, speaking truth to your fear. Okay? Like my older sister, Jessica. She calls me Matthew. She's one of the few people that does that. And she's very caring and very rational. And she would say, Matthew, it's 4 a.m. Here is the evidence why everything's going to be okay. And here's the evidence that you can get through this. Everything is fine. When we try to do that internal to our head and not speak out loud, it only activates one of our language processing centers. But when we say it out loud in the voice of this other person we're imagining, it activates both. It comes through more clearly and has more psychological weight than when we're just repeating it in our own heads. So, something to keep in mind. Okay, so acceptance we've talked about takes a lot of practice. And then practicing compassion bears right out of practicing acceptance. How do I feel? How do they feel? Listening to understand, not listening to respond. But I love this quote. Being deeply loved by someone gives you strength, while loving someone deeply gives you courage. All right, let's say that again. Being loved by someone gives you strength, while loving someone deeply gives you courage. So then we need to risk to love. So remember the hard times. Keep notes on what you're grateful for. And then actually express gratitude to other people out loud. Look them in the eye and say thank you. And ending on this notion. Who you are in this world of becoming is so much more important than who you were, and who you are becoming is so much more important still. Thank you for hanging out with me this morning.